Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. President Joe Biden gives his first State of the Union address tonight. C-SPAN's live programming begins at 8 p.m. Eastern. The president speaks at 9 p.m. Eastern, followed by the Republican response given this year by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. Plus, we'll get your reaction by phone and social media. Coming up on Washington Today, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate on what they expect and want to hear tonight. Also a preview on the issues from Bloomberg News White House correspondent Nancy Cook and on Capitol Hill security and COVID-19 precautions from The Hill's editor-in-chief Bob Cusack. And we're learning who will be in the First Lady Jill Biden's box, her guests for State of the Union. Also today, an emotional plea from the only member of Congress born in Ukraine for President Biden to do more to stop the Russian military assault on her former country. And a disagreement among U.S. Senate leaders, Democrats and Republicans, on how and whether to offset a multi-billion-dollar aid package for Ukraine. And today, the National Park Service with its prediction for this year's cherry blossom tree peak bloom in the D.C. area. From the Associated Press, facing disquiet at home and danger abroad, President Joe Biden will deliver his first State of the Union address at a steeply challenging moment for the nation, aiming to navigate out of the pandemic, reboot his stalled domestic agenda, and confront Russian aggression. Speaking about tonight's speech, Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan.
I'm really excited to hear President Biden tonight. It's amazing how much he's been able to accomplish, and all of us working together have been able to do in 1 year. And we know there's more to do, and we're committed to doing that. Our Senate and House Democratic Policy and Communications Committees have invited guests virtually. We're glad we're going to be back all in the chamber together. There won't be folks in the gallery yet, and so we have each invited someone to a virtual reception and to be with us today. And these are folks that have been keeping our country moving through the pandemic and benefiting from our efforts during President Biden's first year. So we've invited teachers and parents and small business owners and construction workers and healthcare workers and people all across the country who can speak about what the American Rescue Plan and the infrastructure bill and other things have meant to them. My guest is Scott Hammontree, who is the owner of a local music venue in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We've been able to provide support for 288 downtown theaters and arts and live venues that had to shut down completely under COVID. And they're now opening their doors, they're hiring their workers back, people are coming in and enjoying what they have to offer. So thanks to President Biden's steady leadership, truly steady leadership and competence, working with Congress, we have made enormous progress. We've gotten shots in arms, we've gotten tests in people's homes, and we've got kids safely back to school. We've passed an infrastructure law that's a game changer. It's creating jobs, strengthening our communities, and building a better America. And our economy has seen the strongest growth since 1984. The strongest growth since 1984. But too many folks are still feeling the squeeze of higher costs. And we know that. When you shut down the economy in our country and around the globe, and you see the supply chain challenges and the transportation challenges and everything else that has happened, we understand that we have to focus to get people back in a position where those costs are going down. We know it, the president knows it, and that's why he'll lay out a plan tonight to lower costs for folks while continuing our strong economic recovery. We'll strengthen our supply chains, we'll make more things in America, and like semiconducting chips that are so critically important for our auto industry. We'll press back on price gouging, which is very real, very real. Look at oil and gas prices and what is happening here. They set the prices, and there is price gouging, and I would expect more of that to come. We're going to cut costs for things that keep people up at night. We'll lower prices through competition that helps our small businesses and our farmers and protects consumers. The State of the Union is time to reflect on where we've been and to focus on where we're going. And I'm excited to see our nation moving forward and building a stronger America.
Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. Also looking ahead to tonight's State of the Union speech, the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who says what President Biden and the Democrats did for the past year was not productive, and they also did not address several issues that needed attention.
The same voters who gave President Biden the presidency gave him a razor-thin margin in both chambers. His only mandate was to govern from the middle. In his inaugural address, President Biden promised to do just that, to unite and to heal. But for the past year, he and his administration have often behaved like they're trying to fail their own test. Remember, the president made stifling American energy independence a day one priority, killing miles of pipeline and freezing new jobs and new exploration with the stroke of a pen. Then came the spending bill his administration called the most progressive domestic legislation in a generation, and top liberal economists warned would set off inflationary pressures we've not seen in a generation. Inflation has surged so steeply, most Americans have seen their real wages actually cut. Then came the decision to cut and run from the international coalition we led in Afghanistan. President Biden's top military advisors warned that retreat would embolden terrorists, endanger loyal partners, and leave our intelligence capabilities in the region badly handicapped. But the Biden administration failed to heed these warnings and presided over a disastrous withdrawal. Our biggest adversaries took notes. And now one of them is testing the limits of the West's resolve to oppose his murderous conquest. And then there are the alarming trends this administration has placed on the back burner, but which communities across America are facing every day. After spending the presidential campaign talking about potential amnesties, the Biden administration wasted no time making our southern border more porous. CBP has reported its highest single-year total for southern border encounters on record, with no sign of a coherent administration response in sight. Meanwhile, Democrats' response to an historic surge in violent crime has been to double down on the hostility toward police and prosecution that has encouraged it. Across America, radical local prosecutors are simply declining to charge whole categories of crime. But instead of condemning this extremism, the Biden administration has endorsed it, staffing their Justice Department with some of the most outspoken critics of law and order. Meanwhile, this Justice Department goes out of its way to keep tabs on parents who dare to question teachers' unions' veto power over established medical science or exhibit skepticism toward woke propaganda in public schools. So, Mr. President, that's a heck of a rap sheet, but I'm afraid the most damaging legacy of President Biden's first year is bigger than just his unwise policies. Democrats have not just tried pushing bad ideas through our institutions. Even under the presidency of a self-styled institutionalist, the far left has tried to wreck our institutions altogether. Tonight we'll hear from a president who has signed a commission to study packing the Supreme Court because his party didn't like its current ideological makeup. We'll hear from a president who urged his former colleagues to tear up Senate rules in order to rewrite the rules of American elections, likened anyone who opposed these efforts to infamous racists, and continues to stoke racial animus with wild nonsense about a revival of segregation. We'll hear from an administration that has failed its own tests and which candidly has the public approval figures to match. On foreign affairs in particular, I'm sincerely rooting for President Biden's success. We need steady, serious, and smart leadership to help guide the West through this perilous time. But on most issues, what the American people deserve tonight is a commitment to drastically change course.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader on the Senate floor. He mentioned polling, this paragraph from the Associated Press story on the State of the Union address tonight. President Biden is speaking to an American public that is frustrated with his performance. A February AP NORC poll found that more people disapproved than approved of how Biden is handling his job, 55% to 44%. That's down from a 60% favorable rating last July. A closer look at what President Biden might talk about tonight for the State of the Union address and how the planned speech may have changed given the war between Russia and Ukraine. We spoke with Nancy Cook, White House correspondent for Bloomberg News.
I suppose that tonight's speech started off one way in its preparation and now has changed totally because of events in Russia. How much of that change are we going to see reflected tonight?
Well, I think that it's been a big change. Originally, the speech was supposed to hinge on the economy and COVID-19. And so the president originally was going to talk about what he was doing to bring down prices and also the fight against COVID-19. Since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, now obviously he has to talk about that. I still think that the economy will be a major thrust of the speech, but Ukraine will come up too. And the way that I've been told that he's going to talk about Ukraine and the situation with Russia is really as a fight for democracy and, something that America needs to really be mindful of given the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked.
The story had said that one of the themes that he expects to hammer home tonight is the idea of American leadership in what's going on.
Absolutely. And the foreign policy is a good area for President Biden. He served on the Foreign Policy Committee in the Senate for many years. This is an area where he feels very comfortable. And the White House has, done a good job of holding together European allies against Russia. And so I think that we'll see them talk about that. It's interesting because I don't think it's going to be a very wonky foreign policy speech. I think he's going to focus much more on sort of connecting it back to how you preserve democracy both in the U.S. and abroad and talk about it in that way. So it's something that hopefully the White House hopes voters can connect with.
Will we hear anything new about the United States' efforts on this front, or aside from what he's asked Congress as far as money is concerned, will we hear anything else new? Do you know?
Not that I know of. I think that they are still drafting the speech. And so I talked with several White House people yesterday. I think the speech was in flux even yesterday, given how quickly the state of events is changing in the world. But I think that a lot of what he's going to be doing is sort of trying to explain it and frame it for the American people. And then, of course, asking Congress for aid and money.
To the topic of the economy, then, as far as the president is concerned, how does he expect to address the current economy and his administration's role in improving the situation?
Well, I think that two things he's going to talk about. One, he's going to try to talk about the bright spots in the economy, like the labor market and how much the unemployment rate has fallen since he took office. The White House has been frustrated this past year that they feel like they haven't gotten enough credit for some of the good things in the economy. And then two, he's going to address the overarching economic issue that is bothering Americans, which is inflation and just the rise in prices over the last year. We haven't seen prices this high in several decades. And so he's really going to try to express empathy and show that he as president understands how these price increases on everything from bread to milk to cars affects people. And so that is, and then he'll use this opportunity to also tout his Build Back Better agenda and, hoping that Congress can pass that at some point.
So as far as then the plan, well, let's start with inflation itself. Do you think he'll use the word directly or talk around that?
I think that President Biden doesn't like to use super technical terms, and so I imagine we'll hear him use the word inflation maybe once or twice, but I think that much more he'll try to talk about it in terms of rising prices. He's definitely going to address the topic. Whether or not he uses the word inflation, is sort of up for grabs, but I think that he will really try to talk about how he understands that this is a problem for people, and he understands that it is eaten into, raises that people may have gotten or wage gains, and that he sees that.
Well, do we see a specific plan when it comes to inflation or broad points as far as the administration and how they'll deal with it?
The White House is going to talk about two specific things that they are starting to do. Then they are going to cast them as things that they are doing to combat inflation. One is to try, through the Department of Justice, to bring down the cost of ocean shipping, and they're saying that that will help bring down the cost of goods. And then the second thing is more oversight of nursing homes, which again is a policy issue that really came up during the pandemic when there were so many nursing home deaths. I think it's an open question whether or not having the Department of Health change some of the rules about nursing homes is actually an inflationary measure or just sort of more in the health policy bucket.
You talked about Build Back Better as an overall plan from what we understand, not going anywhere as far as Congress, but what does the president plan to address as far as elements of the plan he'd like to revive?
Well, he's going to, interestingly, the White House has really decided over Christmas last year to rebrand Build Back Better, that it wasn't sort of working the way that they wanted, just sort of the selling of it. So they're trying to talk about it differently. So he will still talk about elements of the plan, even if he doesn't use that language, things like lowering the cost of health care, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, trying to bring down the cost of child care. Those are some of the things that White House officials told me yesterday are still going to come up. So he's still going to talk about elements of the plan, even if the framing of it is different.
We saw the administration and Congress pass the infrastructure plan, or sign the infrastructure bill into law. Will we hear more about its implementation tonight?
I think we'll hear more about that, and we'll also hear about the American Rescue Plan, which was the $1.9 trillion plan that Congress passed in March to deal with COVID. The president also, just want to note, is going to Wisconsin tomorrow, Wednesday, the day after the State of the Union, to tout the infrastructure plan. And so I think that we'll hear about, his success in passing those two bills, and then also how it's going to help the country as the money starts to flow into communities.
A couple more questions. Obviously, he mentioned his Supreme Court nominee last week. I suspect that we'll hear more about that tonight.
Yes, I think that will come up certainly as a data point and a highlight that the White House wants to show that they've done this historic thing. They've nominated the first Black woman to the Supreme Court. That is a way that they have tried to distinguish themselves, get some kudos with Black voters, progressive groups, and so I'm sure that will come up as well.
Nancy Cook is White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, joining C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal program. And the First Lady Jill Biden releasing the names of her guests in the First Lady's box, a tradition at the State of the Union address. They include a nurse from Ohio, an Army veteran and steelworker from Pittsburgh, a seventh grader from Virginia who's a student advocate for diabetes awareness, the Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen, and Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Makarova. Congressman Ted Lieu of California chairs the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, part of the leadership team, and he spoke on the House floor today, referencing tonight's State of the Union address.
President Biden and Democrats are building a better America. Last year, we passed American Rescue Plan. That helped get our economy back on track. We've created in America approximately 7 million jobs in the last 12 months. That is a record in U.S. history. We're also experiencing very high economic growth. Jobs are up, wages are up, and unemployment is down. We then follow that up with an infrastructure law that's going to rebuild roads, bridges, and highways. It's going to put broadband internet everywhere, from rural areas to inner cities. It's going to get lead out of our water, and it's going to put EV charging stations across America. What are Republicans doing? Well, I know 2 sitting Republican members went to a white nationalist conference a few days ago. I yield back.
Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, on the House floor today. House Republicans held a news conference to discuss President Biden's State of the Union address tonight. Fox News Channel reporter Chad Pergram asking this question of the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California about how Republican members of Congress will receive the president, with the U.S. facing a foreign policy crisis, Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
What's the balance here? Obviously, Republicans are going to be critical of the president, going to listen to what he has to say and take issue with things that you don't like about his remarks tonight. But when you face a crisis in Europe, there used to be this saying about foreign policy stops at the water's edge. Are your members going to be Emily post about this, or are they going to be, on their proper behavior when it comes to this crisis time, when it comes to a national security crisis the United States is dealing with in Europe?
Well, let me be frank. It's not just Republicans. You look at the latest polls of Americans. They don't think America's going in the right direction. They're paying more for gas. There's a tax on every American with the inflation. We want to see a change in course in history. Are we going to sit down and be quiet? No. I don't think Victoria wants to be quiet when she sees people dying night after night. We're going to push the president to do the right thing. We've warned him ahead of time when the Democrats first took power not to pass the $2 trillion so-called COVID bill that only 9% went to it. We warned him it would cause inflation. Yes, that's what happened. We warned him if they opened up the border, what would happen to the rest of America. We went to the border. So what did the president finally do? He put the vice president in charge, who only has been there one time. They've ignored it. When we said crime is running rampant, that we actually think you should fund the police, not defund them, because this is what would happen. This is exactly what's happening across America today with the rise in crime. We've watched it time after time. But it's not just Republicans, it's independents, it's Democrats, it's Americans. We've watched his approval rating being at a lowest level we saw in modern history. Why? And just the handling of what's happening in Ukraine itself. We tried to help the president by passing an amendment about Nord Stream. He used his political weight from his administration to whip members to vote no. We told the president he was wrong with how he was getting out of Afghanistan. If he did that, it would set the course of the world differently. We said it was wrong when he stood with Putin and gave him Nord Stream. We said it was wrong when he opened up negotiations again with Iran. All those actions have put us into the place we are today. So no, we're not going to sit quietly by. We're going to defend our nation. We're going to defend our way of life, and we're going to change the course of where we currently are.
The House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy of California, other House Republicans as well, on a news conference today on Capitol Hill looking at President Biden's State of the Union address tonight. The official Republican Party response to the president's speech will be given by Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. USA Today writes that spot, the official response, is often reserved for politics' rising stars, the candidates and office holders the major political parties want to showcase to a national audience. It will be the biggest stage yet for Reynolds, who took office in 2017 as the first female governor of Iowa. More on this choice of Governor Reynolds, and also there's a Democratic response coming tonight as well. We spoke to Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill.
Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader who wants to be Speaker, he has praised Reynolds for approaching COVID much differently than the White House, not doing it with a lot of mandates and lockdowns. This has been a key difference in the parties. It's not like all Republicans are anti-vaccination. Some are, but overall, Reynolds is regarded as a rising star. And McCarthy stipulated, hey, this is why we picked her, and that's what you're going to see tonight. Another thing to look at tonight from a historical standpoint is, of course, the Speaker is behind the president and side by side with the vice president. Well, Nancy Pelosi, to get the job of Speaker last time around, she said that this would be her last go round in leadership. So is this the last time we're going to see Nancy Pelosi behind the president? Of course, Republicans think, yes, it's definitely going to be, no matter what, whether she has decided to run for re-election. But Pedro, as you know, independent handicappers are suggesting and predicting already that the House is going to flip based upon the president's weak approval numbers, and as well as just historical and redistricting reasons. So a lot of history tonight. You could be seeing Nancy Pelosi up on the dais, up at the podium for the last time.
And then Rashida Tlaib, the representative from Michigan, again giving her own response, or at least for the Working Families Party. What's behind that move?
Well, the progressives have had a tough run. You know, in the beginning of 2021, it was Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, was saying we're going to go big and bold, but their majorities really hampered them from going big and bold. So Tlaib and the progressives, they want to get basically a handle back on the agenda, because remember, in the beginning of the Build Back Better formulation, there was talk of a $6 trillion to $10 trillion bill. They settled on $3.5 trillion in the budget reconciliation bill. That got whittled down in half to 1.75 and even lower. And now it's regarded as dead until it's resurrected, at least portions of it. So the progressive agenda has taken a hit. We've seen in polls, and we've written this at the Hill, that certain aspects of the left have become less popular. Black Lives Matter, defund the police, which were very popular last summer, have taken hits in popularity. And Bernie Sanders' personal approval ratings, which have always been relatively high, he's now underwater, according to Harris, a Mark Penn poll, which is called Harris Harvard poll. So, Bernie's hurting and the left is hurting. And I think this is a way to say, hey, listen, we need to get aspects of Build Back Better back on the agenda. We need to address climate change. And that's why you're having these different speeches, which over the last decade, there have been, it used to be just the president and the Republican response. Now it's morphed into a lot more.
Bob Cusack is the Hill's editor-in-chief. A C-SPAN interview Tuesday morning on the Washington Journal. And some pushback on Congresswoman Tlaib's planned response. Pushback from a moderate Democrat, Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, who tells Axios that having this response is, quote, like keying your own car and slashing your own tires. He tells them this only highlights the real tension between the socialist far left and the common sense moderate wing, which is focused on crime, costs, tax cuts, and affordability, and turning the page on COVID. Congressman Gottheimer plans himself to take part in his own response to the State of the Union, part of a group called No Labels. More from the Hill's Bob Cusack about security at tonight's State of the Union address and COVID-19 policy.
The fences are back up, and obviously these fences were highly criticized because they were up for a long time after the January 6th riot, but they've been put up for precautionary reasons. And part of the reason is because of the threat of trucker convoys and protests. And obviously after the January 6th debacle, security officials want to play it safe. And that's on the perimeter. There could be a lot of traffic snarls in Washington, D.C., as these convoys are promising to come from Canada and California. We'll see if that pans out. There was a prior one recently on the Washington Beltway that kind of fizzled out, did not have the effect that some had feared. Inside, the security is much different than it was last year. Initially, members were going to have to wear hefty masks, the N95, KN95 masks, that was going to be mandated. However, consistent with CDC guidance, that is now optional. Masks are optional. However, if you want to get in the chamber tonight, you would have had to submit a PCR test, negative test, a day before, so yesterday. So I think, Pedro, the bottom line here is that when you look at the visuals of this year, I think we're going to be seeing a welcoming type of normalcy that we have not seen in quite some time. Last year was about 20% capacity with members. Tonight, I think you're looking at a packed house. We'll see. But all members have been invited, so that is very different than last year. So as Ron Klain, the White House Chief of Staff, said, this is going to be something you look at and think, wow, maybe, kind of paraphrasing here, but we're kind of getting back to normal.
Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill on C-SPAN's Washington Journal Tuesday morning. Some other notes about tonight's State of the Union address. The mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, ordering that Ukrainian flags be hung between the White House and the U.S. Capitol along Pennsylvania Avenue, the route that the president's motorcade will take. Also, President Biden and lawmakers in both parties on Capitol Hill wearing the Ukrainian colors of blue and yellow to show solidarity with the country. President wearing a blue and yellow tie during a conversation with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, according to a tweet sent out by the White House. And Senator Joni Ernst, Republican of Iowa, wearing a yellow flower pin and blue blazer. Number of other blue and yellow combinations being reported. Washington Today continues in a moment. More on the U.S. response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
I can report to the nation, America is on the move again.
Live tonight, the State of the Union. President Biden addresses a joint session of Congress and the nation, reflecting on his first year in office and laying out his agenda for the year ahead. Live coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern. The President speaks at 9, followed by the Republican response, and will take your phone calls and social media reaction. The State of the Union Address, live tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, cspan.org, or on the C-SPAN Now video app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. USA Today reporting on the war in Ukraine, writing a massive 40-mile convoy of Russian tanks and vehicles appeared to bog down as it's pushed toward the capital of Kyiv on Tuesday, while residential areas of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, were being pounded by Russian shells. The Russian military advance drew to within 15 miles of Kyiv center amid signs that troops are running out of gas and food, a senior U.S. Defense Department official said Tuesday. Russia has committed about 80% of the combat force President Vladimir Putin deployed to invade Ukraine, the official said. That was from USA Today. On Capitol Hill, a $6.4 billion humanitarian and security aid package for Ukraine expected to be included in the U.S. overall omnibus spending bill. But there may be a hitch, the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell explaining.
We're working on an omnibus appropriation bill here, and we've hit a snag that you should ask the other side about when they come out. They're willing to ask for a supplemental for non-defense diplomacy and that sort of thing. But on the defense part of the supplemental, they want to take that out of the top line we've already agreed to on defense, which includes parity between defense and non-defense. We're not going to do that. This is an emergency. It's eligible for a supplemental, and defense ought to be treated just like non-defense in the supplemental.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell speaking to reporters at a separate news conference. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer asked to respond.
Republicans are saying that you're refusing to treat defense and humanitarian aid equally outside of the omnibus in a supplemental package. What say you? Can you get this done?
Yeah, well, first we should get it done. Second, above all, we should be bipartisan on this issue. Nothing would make Putin happier than having Democrats and Republicans divided. President Biden has done an incredibly good job on Ukraine. All the naysayers, a lot of our Republican friends wanted us to pass the sanctions bill before the Russians invaded. That would have torn the alliance apart. The Europeans would have walked away. Now we have seen, amazingly, everyone predicted, oh, they won't do SWIFT. They won't do the Russian central bank. But with the European support and encouragement, and they suffer far more from these sanctions than we do, it's all happening. So I believe that President Biden's done a great job. I believe the country wants to follow his lead. I believe the country does not want to see partisan fights. We're going to work on a bipartisan, robust aid package with both military and security needs. There are very good discussions going on about that right now. The best place to include it is in the upcoming omnibus bill, and that's what we intend to get done.
One week for the omnibus bill, there are some Republicans who are arguing that this aid is needed now.
The omnibus bill is the quickest way to get it done. You just put a bill on the floor, you Rule 14 it, you wait for amendments, you wait for agreement. The omnibus is the quickest and most efficient way to get this done.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, with reporters on Capitol Hill. Current U.S. government funding is authorized through March 11th, so that is when an omnibus spending bill to get the government through the rest of this fiscal year, which is the end of September, or another short-term spending bill to buy more time for negotiations will need to pass the House and Senate and be signed into law to avoid a government shutdown. There is one current member of the U.S. Congress who was born in Ukraine, Victoria Spartz, Republican from Indiana. Today, she pleaded for the United States to do more to help Ukraine and stop Russia.
This is not a war. This is a genocide of the Ukrainian people by a crazy man who cannot get over that Ukrainian people do not want socialism, Soviet Union, communists, they want to be with the United States of America. They want to be free people, they want to be with the West. And he cannot get over. I'll tell you a personal story. I have my grandma, she's 95. She is right now in the city of Chernihiv. Actually, Chernihiv and the part of Kiev Rus studied Moscow and control Moscow. So they're bombing, they couldn't take the city. They're bombing civilians non-stop, day and night, the whole city. She has a daughter, she called her daughter, she lives in a little village by Chernihiv. And her daughter told her they came into village with a heavy machine gun, killed almost every person in that village. And whatever people were left, women and children, they forced them to work in front of the tanks as a human shield because they cannot take that city. So she told, my mom was shocked. She says, no, don't cry. We are not crying here. We're going to fight, but just give us some guns so we don't just fight with the sticks. This woman was born in Russia, in Far East. She's a Russian-born woman. And they're killing women and children. They doing the bombs, vacuum bombs, carpet bombs. They are using illegal weapons. They now have special groups that trying to kill women and children tied to expect to Western Ukraine. I called my friend and she said she was able to get out. Her friend was trying to get out. She saw a woman in the gas station get shot with her children with machine guns. So she stayed in the city. They're leveling the cities to the ground, destroying the people. They're slaughtering them like animals. They're killing the people. It is not a war. It's a genocide because we have a crazy man that believes that he has the whole world hostage. And then we have a president that talks about and doesn't do things. And what is he going to wait when millions die? Then he's going to do more? We have not just a moral duty. We are the leaders of the free world. This is going to be the biggest genocide that ever this world experienced. And they're not asking them to fight for us, but they ask us to help, to become serious, that they have ability to defend themselves. That actually they need to understand that we're serious about this sanction, not do a little bit here, maybe we'll just do a little bit this oligarch, this is bit, that we're serious. And I can tell you one thing, if we don't stop him there, he is not going to stop. He is going to go further. And then we'll have to send our children to die to fight this. So I think we have an obligation and duty to save this world, help Ukrainian people to survive. And this president need to get this act together and exercise some leadership. What's happening under his watch is atrocity. What he's doing to this country and to the world is unforgivable. But I think we'll get together as Republicans and Democrats, but he must act decisively fast, or this blood of many millions of Ukrainians will be on his hands too. And all that oil that with blood that's flowing from Russia and gas, and we are buying that, and Europeans are buying that. It's going to be blood, it's mixed with blood of the Ukrainian people. So I hope you're going to help me to send that message, because we have to be strong and we have to stop. Thank you for having me.
Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Republican from Indiana, getting applause at a news conference with other House Republicans in Washington, D.C. today. She was born in the 1970s when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union and continued living there after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 and it became an independent state. She immigrated to the United States in 2000, became a U.S. citizen in 2006. Ukraine is a NATO partner, but not a member of the military alliance, which has 30 countries in it now. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has requested Ukraine be admitted immediately. Today, that sentiment was echoed by Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, Democrat from Texas, who also applauded President Biden for the steps he has taken so far in the crisis.
Our hearts are with the Ukrainian people who are literally fighting for their lives, their country, and their values.
and who are living through a nightmare because of an unprovoked attack by Vladimir Putin. We have been horrified by the war crimes as well as the unfolding humanitarian crisis. I want to begin by expressing my immense gratitude to President Biden for doing the hard work of rebuilding critical alliances, for rallying NATO, ensuring that we had a strong coalition of support for Ukraine. After the prior administration alienated our allies and gave cover to our enemies, it was no doubt a difficult task to unite our friends once again. I'm proud that the United States currently has an administration committed to the transatlantic relationship and to leading the globe in defense of democracy with strength and integrity. I also, for our witnesses, I want to echo what my colleague, Representative Slotkin, mentioned in her advocacy for a different approach to letting countries into NATO. We need that different approach immediately, and we indeed need to meet this moment with urgency. I have the honor and privilege of representing El Paso, Texas, which is home to Fort Bliss, America's second largest military installation and largest joint mobilization force generation installation in the Army. The U.S. and her allies must continue to rally against the threats that we're seeing across the globe and work cohesively to deter and defend one another against aggression from adversaries.
Congresswoman Veronica Escobar at a House Armed Services Committee hearing today. It was titled Engagement with Allies and Partners. One of the witnesses that she referenced was the Assistant Defense Secretary, Mara Karlin, who, according to reports, said the Pentagon is deciding if it should add more U.S. troops to NATO member countries in Eastern Europe on a permanent basis, following Russia's attack on Ukraine last week. Also, the White House releasing excerpts from President Biden's State of the Union address tonight, and on Russia and Ukraine, he will say Putin's war was premeditated and unprovoked. He rejected efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond, and he thought he could divide us here at home. Putin was wrong. We were ready. That quote, that excerpt released by the White House on what the president will say tonight in the State of the Union address. From CNN, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged U.S. counterpart Joe Biden to deliver a strong and useful message about the Russian invasion at the State of the Union speech in an exclusive interview with CNN and Reuters from the bunker in Kyiv in which he is leading his military response. CNN article going on in a rare interview on Tuesday afternoon, Zelensky said as long as Moscow's attacks on Ukrainian cities continued, little progress could be made in talks between the two nations.
You sent your delegation to meet the Russians for talks.
Yeah.
Did anything substantial come out of that? Is there any hope, as the world watches, for diplomacy?
They decided to begin to speak about this situation. And I really wanted, and I asked them, so you have to speak, first of all, everybody has to stop fighting, and to go to that point from where it was beginning. Yeah. Yes, it began 6 days ago. Yes. I think there are principal things you can do it, and that is very important moment. If you'll do this, and if those side is ready, it means that they are ready for the peace. If they don't ready, it means that you're wasting time.
And do you think you're wasting your time, or do you think they're ready?
We'll see.
CNN's interview, part of it, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a bunker in the capital city, Kyiv. Russian news agency TASS reporting that another round of Russian-Ukrainian peace talks will happen on Wednesday. Great Britain's Prince Charles giving words of support for Ukraine. The prince speaking in Southend-on-Sea in eastern England, and he compared Russia's invasion of Ukraine with the murder of a local member of parliament, David Ames, who was stabbed to death last year while meeting with constituents.
What we saw in the terrible tragedy in Southend was an attack on democracy, on an open society, on freedom itself. We are seeing those same values under attack today in Ukraine in the most unconscionable way. In the stand we take here, we are in solidarity with all those who are resisting brutal aggression.
Prince Charles of Great Britain. At the United Nations today, over 100 diplomats from 40 Western countries and allies walking out of a virtual speech by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. It was to the UN Human Rights Council in protest over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Only a few diplomats stayed in the room, including those from Syria, China, and Venezuela. United Nations also appealing for $1.7 billion to help the millions of Ukrainians suffering inside, not necessarily the refugees, inside the country, as artillery attacks destroy critical infrastructure, providing necessities like clean drinking water. UN General Assembly continue an emergency meeting on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's the second day today of 3 days expected. Most countries' representatives taking part are siding with Ukraine, but not all of them. Today, the Cuban ambassador, Pedro Luis Pedroso Cuesta, said this through an interpreter.
It is not possible to rigorously and honestly analyze the current situation in Ukraine without carefully considering the factors that have led to the use of force and the non-observance of legal principles and international standards. Cuba fully supports these principles, which it upholds, and considers that they are an indispensable reference, particularly for small countries, against hegemony, the abuse of power, and injustice. The United States' determination to continue the progressive expansion of NATO towards the borders of the Russian Federation have led to a scenario with unpredictable scope, but which could nevertheless have been avoided. The military movements made by the United States and NATO in recent months are well known in their movement towards regions adjacent to the Russian Federation, preceded by the delivery of modern weapons to Ukraine, which is the equivalent of a military pincer movement. It was a mistake to ignore the Russian Federation's demands for security guarantees, and it was a mistake to suppose that it would remain inactive in the face of a threat to its national security. It is not possible to achieve peace by surrounding and closing in on states. The responsibility falls to the government of the United States because of its doctrine of increasing the offensive military policy outside the borders of NATO, which threatens international peace, stability, and security. Our concerns are heightened by the recent decision of NATO to activate for the first time the response force of that military alliance.
The voice of the interpreter for the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations, Pedro Luis Pedroso Cuesta, at the United Nations General Assembly. It's day 2 of an expected 3 of an emergency meeting on Russia and Ukraine. Most of the country's representatives speaking in support of Ukraine, but there are a few, as you heard, that will note Russia's interests. On Wednesday, it is expected a resolution at the UN General Assembly will pass condemning Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. This is Washington Today. From military.com, there's this. The Biden administration launching a string of new initiatives to help sick or financially struggling veterans, including a push to help combat veterans sickened by burn pits, part of President Biden's State of the Union address on Tuesday night. Debate on one of those bills started in the U.S. House today to expand VA health care access for more post-9/11 terror attack veterans. Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, Democrat from Pennsylvania, speaking in favor.
The Honoring Our Pact bill enacts long overdue support for over 3 million veterans suffering from illnesses due to exposure to toxins and radiation during military service. This comprehensive bill will cut red tape to get veterans benefits, allowing veterans exposed to chemical, airborne, and radioactive hazards to receive full health benefits to treat illnesses related to that exposure. We owe it to our vets to pass this bill and provide them with the benefits they deserve.
Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, Democrat, Pennsylvania, on the House floor. Estimated price tag on this bill is just over $200 billion for 10 years. The White House says the president strongly supports it. But the U.S. Senate has already passed a very scaled-down version costing about $1 billion. And on the floor today of the House, Republican Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, also Pennsylvania, says the House should be passing that.
As an Iraq War veteran, I believe supporting toxic, exposed veterans should be of the highest priority. Approximately 3.5 million veterans who served our nation after the terrorist attacks of 9/11 were exposed to open-air burn pits and other toxins. Many of these troops now suffer from serious health issues, including rare and aggressive cancers, respiratory conditions, and other illnesses. Yet they face significant barriers to obtaining help from the VA. These men and women put their lives on the line to defend our freedoms. We must provide them with the care and benefits they've earned. That's why I'm disappointed that we're here considering H.R. 3967 rather than voting on the Health Care for Burn Pit Veterans Act, a bipartisanship bill that's already passed the Senate by unanimous consent. If we took up that bill immediately, it could be signed into law by the end of the week, ensuring swift delivery of life-saving care for toxic exposed veterans.
Congressman Guy Reschenthaler on the House floor. Today, the House took the first step on the original bill brought up by the Democrats, voting to approve the rules for debate. More debate on that bill and a final vote expected this week. The weather is warming up a bit in the Washington, D.C. area, and that means the cherry blossoms will soon be blooming. It was 110 years ago. The mayor of Tokyo, Japan, gave Washington, D.C. the gift of 3,000 cherry blossoms. Ryo Koriyoshi is the Japanese embassy acting spokesman.
The embassy is so happy that this year's event will have much more in-person. This year's festival will have much more in-person events. But we are, at the same time, excited for different reasons. 2022 is actually 110th anniversary of the gift of cherry blossom trees from Tokyo to Washington, D.C. Thank you. I'm sure that when people gathered at Tidal Basin in 1912 to plant the first tree, they had no idea what an impact their effort would make. But looking back, we can now see that those cherry blossoms have become a lasting symbol of a special friendship that has grown between Japan and the United States. And they have also become root for this wonderful springtime celebration that brings us together today.
Japan's embassy acting spokesman at a news conference today in southwest Washington, D.C., overlooking the Tidal Basin where many of those cherry blossom trees are planted. And joining them at the news conference, the center of attention, really, Jeff Reinbold, Superintendent, National Mall and Memorial Parks of the National Park Service, with the prediction for peak bloom.
So, and now, the moment we've all been waiting for. In determining when peak bloom will occur, our horticulturalists are tracking the winter temperatures and forecasts for March, historical data of the peak blooms, and observations of the trees. I guess you could say we've got a lot of balls in the air, right? You knew that was coming. So to help reveal the bloom dates, we've asked someone who knows a bit about keeping balls in the air to help us out. And so, with that, the projected dates for peak bloom are, don't drop it, Jeff, March 22nd to 25th. Fantastic. Spring will be here before you know it, right? And of course, the cherry trees development this is like the clause I have to add, is dependent on weather conditions. So the Park Service horticulturalists will be monitoring the bud development. We will be reporting the status of the blooms and making any necessary updates to peak bloom on our social media channels. So regardless of when the blooms are open, we have a full month of flowers and festivities to look forward to during the National Cherry Blossom Festival.
Jeff Reinbold with the National Park Service. And this year's National Cherry Blossom Festival runs March 20th through April 17th, and it is returning to in-person events after largely being virtual the past 2 years because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today is also Mardi Gras, which is also returning to more in-person celebrations. Congressman Troy Carter from Louisiana speaking on the House floor.
Down in New Orleans, where the blues were born, it takes a cool cat to blow a horn. Down on LaSalle and Rampart Street, it's a combo with a mambo beat. Today is Mardi Gras, and as in New Orleans, this is a special time for our city and our region. It's a joyous time culminating today in the dizzying, colorful explosion that is Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. Everywhere else, it's just a Tuesday, but in Louisiana, it's Mardi Gras, a time for merriment, a time for joy, a time to party and recognize the culture that makes New Orleans so unique and makes Louisiana so special. It's a one-of-a-kind experience. Some might call this biased, but objectively, I think everyone should enjoy and experience Mardi Gras. Today, people from all over the world come together. Crews of all stripes, backgrounds, work to pull off a day like none other. After the challenges of isolation and the pandemic, this year's Mardi Gras is a chance for us to reunite, reconnect, and celebrate what truly makes New Orleans, New Orleans. The love, the peace, the culture, the energy of its people. While I'm in D.C. for House business and for the President's State of the Union address, my heart is at home as the Zulu float turns on Jackson Avenue and the oceans of people scream and yell, "Throw me something, mister." Our hearts are full of joy. My heart is handing out coconuts at the Zulu parade as we speak, although I am physically in Washington, D.C. People attending balls and costuming and letting everyone be themselves is what Mardi Gras is all about. A time of love, a time of expression, a time of cultural explosion. Happy Mardi Gras to one, happy Mardi Gras to all. Have a safe and happy Mardi Gras. Enjoy the beautiful weather. And for all of you watching, I invite you all to come to Louisiana. Have a slice, have a piece of Mardi Gras. No matter where you are or where you're from, let's show each other some love this season. And as we say in Louisiana, laissez-les, bon temps, roulez. Are you back?
Congressman Troy Carter, Democrat from Louisiana, on the House floor today in Washington. WDSU in New Orleans writes that New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell arrived on Fat Tuesday at the start of the Zulu parade. She thanked the city of New Orleans for their diligence during the coronavirus pandemic so people could come and enjoy Mardi Gras. Said the people of the city are resilient and that New Orleans is showing why it is the best city in America, and that she ended her message with a simple statement: New Orleans is back, baby. Wall Street today, the Dow falling 597 points, NASDAQ down 218, S&P down 67. And this from CNBC. Major League Baseball and its players union failed to reach a deal by the MLB-imposed Tuesday deadline. As a result, Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred said he would cancel opening day and some regular season games. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more top Washington stories sent to you each day with C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. And have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls live on the air on the news of the day. And we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, we'll get your reaction to President Biden's State of the Union address and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Join the conversation all morning with your phone calls, emails, Facebook comments, and tweets. Be sure to watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app.